Hey everybody, welcome to this week of More, and super glad you joined us this week. Hey, if you were at our campuses or online Sunday watching the service, you know that we went really into some heavy parts of the end of days or the end of the world as we began talking about the Great Tribulation. You probably heard from one of our communicators Sunday that we really didn't go as far or as deep as we could go into that, just primarily because of time and also because of the content itself. Certainly Revelation is the place you can go to get a lot of the details about what's going to take place during those 7 years of the Great Tribulation. But it really begins, as you may have heard on Sunday as well, back in the book of Daniel. Now, last week we were in Daniel 12 looking at this idea of, hey, listen, you don't need to worry about these things, just trust me. Don't be afraid, the angel told Daniel. So we want to back up just a little bit more now in the book of Daniel, and I want us to focus in this week in Daniel chapter 9. So if you have a copy of God's Word, if you're in a small group, or if you're doing this by yourself, you're certainly going to want to dig into this passage and the questions that follow. Let me set it up by reminding you that the reason we're going back there is because Jesus himself spoke about what Daniel said. Remember this? This was from verse 15 in Matthew chapter 24. Matthew 24:15. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Well, we don't have a lot of time to go on Sunday mornings into detail there, so I thought we would go back to that passage, Daniel chapter 9. I want to read this to you tonight or today, whenever you're watching this, and I want you to just listen to this, and then I want to just talk through a little bit of that and then give you some time to have some discussion in your small group or by yourself this week. This is where we're going to start, Daniel chapter 9, verse 20. The first part of chapter 9 is a prayer that Daniel's praying. He's praying for himself. He's praying for the nation of Israel. He's praying for their relationship with God and for what the Lord might do. And in verse 19, he talks about, or he says, Lord, hear me, Lord, forgive, Lord, act. Do something for your own reputation, for your own sake. Your people need you. And then this is what we read, verse number 20. While I was speaking, praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my petition before the Lord my God concerning the holy mountain of God, while I was praying, Gabriel, the man I had seen in the first vision, reached me in my extreme weariness about the time of the evening offering. So, the angel Gabriel comes back to him again. And after he has prayed and after he has poured himself out before God, God responds to him by sending this messenger, this angel, Gabriel, to him. And now here in the late evening, as the offering time, he kind of sets up the time, Gabriel gives him an explanation. This is what he says. He says, Daniel, verse 22, I've come now to give you understanding. I'm going to lay it out for you, he says. At the beginning of your petitions, an answer went out, and I have come to give it, for you are treasured by God. So consider the message and understand the vision. And here's what he says, beginning in verse 24. 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city, to bring the rebellion to an end, to put a stop to sin, to atone for iniquity, to bring in understanding, everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Know and understand this. From the issuing of the decree to restore and build Jerusalem, mark that, until an anointed one, the ruler, will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be rebuilt with a plaza and a moat, but in difficult times. After those 62 weeks, the anointed one will be cut off and will have nothing. The people of the coming ruler will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come with a flood, and until the end there will be war. Desolations are decreed. He will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and offering, and the abomination of desolation will be on a wing of the temple until the decreed destruction is poured out on the desolator. Well, my goodness, there's a lot there. So let me say this first and foremost. When we look at Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27, or even go back to 20, I want you to understand that this is probably one of the most intensely studied and debated passages in the entire Bible. That's how important this passage is. That's not an understatement or an oversell. It is that important. Contained in this passage, you've probably seen charts on display in churches when they start talking about the end times and they start talking about what is going to happen, when it's going to happen, dates and measures of time, the return of Christ, the rapture of the church, the great tribulation, and in the middle of it all, the Antichrist. So I want to take just a second today and dig into some of the imagery we find here that maybe was discussed in a big picture way on Sunday, and give you some room to study it a little deeper here. So Gabriel says, Daniel, I'm going to give you an explanation. I'm going to give you some information now about the vision that you've had so that you have some understanding of it. And here's what he said. There is a period of time, 70 weeks, that have been decreed to your people. And during that time, there's going to be an end of the rebellion, a stopping of the sin, an atonement for iniquity, and there's going to be a ushering in of everlasting righteousness. In other words, the things that have been wrong, the brokenness of this world, the sin of this world is going to be dealt with once and for all. And at that time, an everlasting righteousness is going to seal up vision and prophecy, and there's going to be one anointed in the most holy place. Now, when is that going to happen? He says that is from the issuing of the decree to restore and build Jerusalem until an anointed one, the ruler, comes. Now let me explain what that means. The Gentiles would oppress the Jews and Jerusalem for 70 weeks of years. The timing of that, the Hebrew word of that, speaks of an increment of time related to years, and in other places, an increment of time related to weeks. So we're talking about 490 years. That's going to be broken apart into two places. The first is 69 weeks, or 483 years, mark the time from the decree of Artaxerxes in 444 BC for the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem. You may remember part of that story in the book of Ezra, and the bulk of that story in the book of Nehemiah. So Artaxerxes says Israel can rebuild itself. It can rebuild the walls around Jerusalem. And so in 444 BC, that decree goes out. Mark the time. That goes all the way until around 30 AD. Now, what is important about 30 AD? 30 AD is the time frame or the time period when Jesus would make his triumphal entry into Jerusalem. Verse 25, from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, Artaxerxes, until an anointed one, the ruler, will be 7 weeks, the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem before he dies. But then read on. It says, after those 62 weeks, verse 26, the anointed one will be cut off and will have nothing. What does that mean? That's specifically prophesying that this anointed one, this one who will ride into Jerusalem that has been rebuilt, Jesus' triumphal entry, will be cut off. He will be crucified. He will lose his life. Then the 70 week, that ends the 69th week, and now we're waiting for the 70th week. We read on, after those 62 weeks, verse 26, and no one will be cut off, have nothing. The people of the coming ruler will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Jerusalem will fall. The end will come with a flood. Until the end, there will be war. Desolations are decreed. And then what happens next? Verse 27, he will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week. God is going to declare a week, a 7-year period of the Great Tribulation. The Great Tribulation. That's an amazing moment of prophecy. What would that look like? He says, for many, in the middle of the week, things will change. The first 3.5 years will be this, and then something will change. What will change? The abomination of desolation will rise. The Antichrist. We looked at that Sunday. halfway through that week or halfway through the 7 years, Antichrist will rise in power. He will begin to denounce all other gods. He will declare himself a god, and he will begin to wreak havoc on this world. And it says in verse 27, the abomination of desolation will be on a wing of the temple until the decreed destruction is poured out on the desolator. He will have 3.5 years of terror and terrorizing our world. It is a troubling passage of Scripture. There's a lot of imagery in there, the years and the times. We don't have time to put charts up tonight, and I'm not sure that you want to see all the charts. The time frame, the periods of time, where we're at in all this, what does that look like? All of those things are important. We talked last week about the fact that we don't want prophecy to be something that's scary, and we still don't. But we do think that what Jesus said in Matthew 24, watch so that you're not deceived, is important. Daniel chapter 9 may be one of those passages that is contested by some or debated by many. But here's the deal. We don't want you to focus on the trees, or the forest rather. We want you to focus on the trees. It's easy for us to miss the main point of a difficult text like this, or a prophecy of things to come. The original audience of this text was to understand that God had delayed the restoration because they had not done something right. Maybe they needed to fix something. The truth of the matter is God has a plan. And what we need to learn is that God's plan is going to move forward. And what we need to do is simply trust Him. Maybe part of your discussion tonight, maybe part of what you need to talk about tonight in your small group is where you are in all that. We recognize over the last couple of weeks that many people have expressed fear or concern about what is going on in our world now that we've raised the question. Maybe that's the bigger question for you. What preparations have you made? What preparations do you need to make so that you can live your life with confidence and hope? Daniel chapter 9. Spend some time looking at these verses, particularly verses 24 through 27. You may not understand it all. You may not agree with it all. Some of these things, though, are about to happen. When? We don't know. But they're still to come. And when they do come, you'll know. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you next week for the last in our message series of More. Have a great week.